Welcome to Crawford Art Gallery and this guided tour of the exhibition STATIO BENE, Art in Ireland's Maritime Haven. I'm the exhibition's curator, Michael Waldron, and I'd like to invite you on this journey through 48 selected artworks from Crawford Art Gallery's collection. These describe the maritime traditions and history of the south of Ireland, and we will enjoy some wonderful views of Cork Harbour, but also some telling references to our rich maritime history. The exhibition itself is inspired by Cork's motto, Statio Bene Fida Carinus, which means a safe haven for ships. And so this exhibition considers that idea of a safe haven. What does it mean and what has it meant over time and through a number of artworks? The exhibition itself is kindly supported by O'Leary Insurance Group, Mainport and Port of Cork. Measuring some 70 square kilometres, Cork Harbour is renowned for being one of the world's largest natural harbours by navigable area. And this has meant centuries of commerce and trade, but also migration and settlement. In fact, the earliest settlements in Cork Harbour date back thousands of years, and it has been known as Corcach Mór na Muin, so the Great Marsh of Munster, further upriver, and of course the river itself, An Lee, in Irish means deluge or flood. So this extraordinary capacious space can tell many tales, including in this painting behind me, which dates to 1809 and tells of the real scale and capacity of the harbour. Of course, part of Cork Harbour's story is one of empire and colony. And for many centuries, it was a key defensive and provisioning port of the British Empire, particularly as ships transited the Atlantic Ocean. This was a last port of call. From 1921 until the late 1930s, it was also one of the treaty ports in Ireland. A dramatic painting such as this gives us some indication as to why a safe harbour might be important down through history. Part of a safe harbour's story is of course going to be one of defence, and some of the works in this exhibition speak to that long history of fortification in Cork Harbour. There are numerous forts and towers within Cork Harbour that were designed in many cases during the Napoleonic era as deterrents to the enemy. And I suppose none more picturesque and recognisable than Blackrock Castle itself. This particular watercolour is quite charming and naive, but it tells us a really interesting story which dates back at least to the 18th century, and that is called Throwing the Dart. Which is an annual tradition in Cork where the Lord Mayor asserts their position as Admiral of the Harbour. This painting is iconic as part of Crawford Art Gallery's collection because it tells us so much of a time now past, and yet there are extraordinarily recognisable elements within it. It is a landscape painting taken from an unusual vantage point, which seems to place us in the middle of the River Lee as we face upriver to the traditional home of the Port of Cork. This is called Paddle Steamer Entering the Port of Cork, and it's by the self-taught marine artist George Mounsey Wheatley Atkinson. Quite a long name, but a very, very recognisable style. He began his career as a ship's carpenter and travelled the high seas, so knew shipping inside and out. He was also a surveyor of shipping and emigration in his later years, so understood the mechanics of the port as it operated. And as we can see from this painting, we have a paddle steamer that is making its way up the River Lee to its berth. And on either side of the river we can see the tall masted ships that crowd the city's quays. This is important because it tells us here in 1842 that the age of steam is starting to replace that of sail. So it's an important moment in shipping history. It also tells us of a bustling city, a city that is growing prosperous in terms of commerce, but also on the cusp of the Great Irish Famine. So there is a tension historically here between what we see and what we know is going to happen. There are some wonderful details as well within the painting, so not least the bonded warehouses and the Harbour Commissioner's building at the centre of the painting, just beyond the paddle steamer. But also over to this side of the painting we can see Penrose House, which was the home of the St George Steam Packet Company, and that plied a trade between Bristol and Cork and Liverpool, and so this was a very active, I suppose, cross-Irish Sea business. We also have St Patrick's Church behind it, and high up on the hills Shandon Steeple, so recognisable features of the city. And then to the other side of the river we have things that have been lost. So the clock tower of the old City Hall, which was burned during the burning of Cork in December 1920. And further beyond that again, you have a lone spire of the old St Finbarr's Cathedral, which was replaced in the 1860s with the three spires that we now know and admire. Overall, when we look at this painting, the warmth of the colours are very, very welcoming. And this is, I suppose, a love letter to a port that the artist himself knew well and derived success and prosperity from. So it is also an essay in telling us about Cork's position within the world of the 1840s, one that is part of a larger transnational and transatlantic system, one of empire, yes, but also of trade with the Netherlands and the United States. Although this elevation view of the Cork Customs House dates to 1997, it tells us of a history of the building that I'm standing in right now that stretches back nearly 300 years. The Custom House now is Crawford Art Gallery, but in 1724 it was built at the King's expense. This is where the customs and excises for Cork City were conducted. If you were coming to Cork City, this is where you would do your business. And it's extraordinary to think that within this very room we had all of the clerks stamping and franking their paperwork, and taxes were being paid. So the energy of this very room is very suitable for I suppose this exhibition in general, but also to tell us a little bit more about the commercial past of the city. The watercolour here is by Charlotte Kennedy and depicts the very beautiful sort of 18th century Palladian architecture of this building as it once was. And right at its centre, just above the main entrance as it was then, we have a clock, and flanking the clock is this extraordinary sculptural detail that may go unnoticed to the untrained eye. These are two limestone pineapples, and they tell us of the international trade that Cork was involved in during the 18th century, but also that they are a symbol of welcome. In the 18th century, if you could afford a ripe and tasty pineapple, it meant that not only did you have great wealth, but in sharing it, you could also demonstrate your hospitality. So this is a keen symbol of Ireland's and Cork's position in the world at the time, but also how it saw itself as a welcoming port for all. Although the work behind me is actually a view of West Cork and not Cork Harbour itself, it tells us of a very important and widespread story that unfolded during the 1840s in Ireland, and that of course was one of mass immigration. Here we have a whole host of people who are awaiting embarkation in the harbour of Schull. But equally this could be an image of Cork Harbour. We have the same emotive history, those farewells, and in many cases final farewells, when journeys were arduous and perhaps only one way. So this exhibition also speaks to that aspect of the experience of a safe harbour and leaving that safe harbour behind. It is thought that between the late 1840s and the start of the 1850s, almost 6 million people migrated from Cork Harbour alone to Britain and the United States. Cork Harbour has many tales to tell, some of them tall tales and others historically accurate. This painting behind me of Crosshaven is reputedly where Sir Francis Drake hid from the Spanish in 1589, and there is a place near Crosshaven called Drake's Pool which still tells of that reputation for this reach of Cork Harbour. And on the subject of the harbour's reaches, while we've already thought about defence, commerce and migration, the harbour also affords other pursuits, and particularly those of leisure. And Cork Harbour is the home of the oldest established yacht club in the world. The Royal Cork Yacht Club was founded in 1720 on Holbolan Island in the heart of Cork Harbour. It was then known as the Cork Water Club. And then during the 19th century, it transferred its headquarters to the town of Cove, which then became known as Queenstown temporarily. And the little clubhouse here in this wonderful watercolour tells us of its centrality to this Victorian town. And then subsequently that story carried across the haven, the safe harbour, to Crosshaven again. So this exhibition was designed to coincide with the 300th anniversary in 2020 of the Royal Cork Yacht Club, and it has many tales yet to tell. On the subject of leisure and of yachting, we have a series of beautiful watercolours here that are by the artist Richard Peterson Atkinson, who was the son of George, who we met earlier. They chart the progress of a particular yacht known as Knight Templar in the 1870s. This was owned by the Seymour family, who were based in the Cork Harbour area and derived their prosperity from the commerce of those surroundings. And it's really remarkable to think of this yacht as being very well known at the time. And these were probably made in and around a time of a particular yachting race that was coming to Cork Harbour in the 1870s. To round out this tour of STATIO BENE, I'd like to spend just a little bit of time thinking about the works behind me, this extraordinary grid of 16 lino cuts. They're taken from a series of 40 made by the artist printmaker Jamie Murphy in 2012. And that series is called Albert, Ernest and the Titanic. This particular narrative that the artist has created surrounds the printmakers who were on board Titanic during its maiden voyage in April 1912. And the selection we have here on display as part of the exhibition tells of that extraordinary moment of the Titanic itself leaving Belfast Lough, journeying to Southampton, Cherbourg, and its last port of call, Queenstown, or Cove, County Cork. We also see the transatlantic voyage of this fabled and infamous vessel. The reason for including works such as this is not only, I suppose, to chart that history of Irish art, historically from the 18th century and 19th century right up to the present, but also to acknowledge what happens when you leave your safe harbour. We have already considered ideas of migration, but the peril that faces a voyager who leaves the embrace of a safe harbour and enters a wider world is at the core of these works. Although we haven't been able to explore all of the works in the exhibition during this short tour, I hope you'll have enjoyed the stories and insights into the work of these wonderful artists and the images that they have recorded through time. I would like to thank you for joining me, and I will leave you with the words of the Irish poet Paula Meehan. May fixed stars guide you until you reach safe harbour, a place to call home.